unveiling 6 epic drama facts of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was a series of uprisings from 1905 to 1917. It was a transformative event that led to the end of the Romanov dynasty and the establishment of the Soviet Union. The revolution was driven by various factors, including economic hardship, food shortages, government corruption, and social unrest. Join us now for Liber-Tea and learn about the significance of the Russian Revolution. Background and history. Serfdom, a form of feudalism, persisted in Russia until 1861. Much later than in Western Europe, the emancipation of serfs allowed peasants more freedom to organize and contributed to the growing unrest and dissatisfaction of the Tsarist autocracy. However, the reality of their newfound freedom was far more complicated than many had anticipated. While they were no longer tied to the land, most peasant families remained impoverished and struggled to eke out a living. Many were forced to work in factories or mines for low wages, while others turned to crime or joined revolutionary movements in search of a better life. Significant reforms. One of the most significant reforms that followed was the expansion of education. Prior to the emancipation, education was reserved for the nobility and clergy. However, with the newfound freedom of the serfs, education became a way to advance socially and economically. This led to the establishment of schools throughout the country, as well as the founding of universities and technical colleges. As a result, a new class of educated professionals emerged in Russia, including doctors, lawyers, and engineers. Another important reform was the modernization of agriculture. Under serfdom, the land was poorly managed, leading to low crop yields and frequent famine. However, with the end of serfdom, peasants were able to own their own land and improve their farming techniques. The government also invested in infrastructure, such as roads and railways, to facilitate the transportation of goods. These changes led to a significant increase in agriculture productivity and helped to prevent the severity of future famines. Despite these reforms, however, the Tsarist autocracy remained in power, and the vast majority of Russians continued to suffer from poverty and oppression. This ultimately led to the Russian Revolution of 1917, which overthrew the Tsarist regime and established the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, the legacy of the abolition of serfdom continued to shape Russian society for decades to come, laying the foundation for the modernization and progress that would follow. Political repression. The autocratic rule of the Romanovs was characterized by strict censorship, arbitrary arrest, and violent suppression of dissent. This created a climate of fear and anger among the people, and further fueled revolutionary sentiment. The secret police, or Okhrana, was infamous for conducting surveillance on citizens and infiltrating revolutionary groups. They employed brutal methods of torture and interrogation to extract information and suppress any opposition. Dissidents were often exiled to Siberia or executed without trial. The government also imposed strict controls on the press and literature, limiting the dissemination of ideas that would challenge the regime. These repressive measures only served to intensify the people's desire for change and fueled the flames of revolution. The autocratic rule of the Romanovs not only led to political repression, but also economic hardship for the people. The peasants, who made up the majority of the population, were subjected to heavy taxes and forced labor. They had little or no access to education, healthcare, or basic amenities. The industrial workers, on the other hand, were subjected to long hours, low wages, and poor working conditions in the factories. They had no rights or representation in the government and were often treated as disposable labor. The middle class, comprising of professionals and merchants, faced restrictions on their businesses and limited opportunities for social mobility. All these factors combined to create a widespread sense of discontent and frustration among the people, which was reflected in the growing revolutionary sentiment. World War I. Russia's entry into World War I in 1914 put immense strain on the country's resources and led to food shortages and inflation. The government's mismanagement of the war effort and failure to address the needs of the population further eroded its legitimacy and contributed to the revolution. The situation in Russia during World War I was dire. The soldiers at the front population were ill-equipped and lacked proper training, which led to significant losses. Meanwhile, the civilization population was suffering from food shortages and skyrocketing prices, making it increasingly difficult for them to survive. The government's response to these issues was slow and inadequate, leading to widespread discontent among the people. As the war dragged on, the situation only worsened, with more and more Russians calling for an end to the conflict. Unfortunately, the government's inability to address these concerns would ultimately lead to its downfall and the rise of the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, were a socialist political party that had long opposed Russia's involvement in World War I. They saw the war as a capitalist endeavor that only served the interests of the wealthy elite. As the situation in Russia deteriorated, their message began to resonate with more and more people. In 1917, they seized power in a coup, overthrowing the provisional government that had taken over the monarchy after its collapse. They promised to end the war and bring relief to the suffering population. They quickly signed a peace treaty with Germany, withdrawing Russia from the conflict. They also implemented policies aimed at improving the lives of ordinary Russians, including land reforms, worker protections, and increased access to education and healthcare. These measures helped to stabilize the country and win the support of many previously disillusioned citizens. However, the new government's policy also sparked opposition from those who had benefited from the old system, including wealthy landowners and business owners. This led to a brutal civil war that lasted until 1922, pitting the Bolsheviks against a coalition of anti-communist forces. The Bolsheviks emerged victorious, establishing the Soviet Union and launching a new era in Russian history. Intellectuals and revolutionary leaders. A group of intellectuals, including writers, philosophers, and political agitators, played a key role in spreading revolutionary ideas and organizing opposition to the government. Leaders such as Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky were instrumental in the success of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. They were able to galvanize the masses and inspire them to take action. These intellectuals believed in the power of ideas and were convinced that they could change society through their writings and speeches. They saw themselves as part of a larger movement, one that was dedicated to creating a new world order based on equality, justice, and freedom. Lenin and Trotsky were particularly skilled at organizing and mobilizing people, and they were able to turn the Bolsheviks into a formidable political force. Despite facing overwhelming odds, they never gave up on their vision of a better future, and their perseverance paid off in the end. Their legacy continues to inspire activists and revolutionaries around the world to this day. The Russian Revolution was a complex and multifaceted event, with many factors contributing to its ultimate success. Despite the hardships and upheaval it caused, the revolution fundamentally altered the course of Russian history and had far-reaching effects on the world stage. One of the most significant consequences of the Russian Revolution was the establishment of the Soviet Union, which became a global superpower in the decades that followed. The Soviet Union's communist ideology and aggressive foreign policy created a new geopolitical landscape, with the world divided between capitalist and communist powers. The tensions between these two ideologies would shape global politics for much of the 20th century, leading to proxy wars, arms races, and a constant state of alert. In addition to its impact on international affairs, the Russian Revolution also had profound effects on Russian society itself. The Bolsheviks' policies aimed at creating a more equal and just society led to significant changes in how Russians lived their lives. Women were given greater rights and opportunities, and many previously oppressed minorities were able to assert their identities and cultures. At the same time, the revolution also had negative consequences, including widespread violence, economic disruption, and political repression. Despite these challenges, however, the legacy of the Russian Revolution endures, inspiring movements for social justice and equality around the world. Thank you for joining Liber-Tea and the deep dive into the Russian Revolution and its historical influence on the world around us. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and be sure to let us know other future events you would like for us to share.